lived up on the third floor, and we found out I got a piano for $45. I was out on the Baltimore Hill, and we brought that in, and I had a friend who was a giant, and he pushed that dirt thing up those steps himself.
Wow.
On boards, went up
Amazing.
3 flights of steps. And I'm in front, but I couldn't do anything, and I kept thinking, oh, Lord God, if this thing ever starts rolling back at him, that'd be the end.
Yeah.
He pushed that baby up. I'll never forget that. And so I started giving a few piano lessons, and that helped. Like I used to say, when I played for $1 for the Lions Club, back when I was in high school, I'd get $1 for playing. I'd say, easy money. But I had to walk about to get to where they were.
Yep.
But anyway, that was how I got started. And then how I got the job at Westminster High School was, well, first of all, I never played any jazz at all. I didn't. When around Dr. Hagermeyer, I never played anything. She didn't realize all the experience I had in the service, all the boogie-woogie and all the different styles I could play. And so she started me out she had tested me out, and she started me out just like in third grade music. Played little easy Mozart, and stuff. And that was all right. I just let it go. I wanted to do good because I knew I had to do good, or I would have a wife. But she stuck by me because I met her in Indianapolis. She came every night for almost 4 weeks to hear me play when I was playing. And I thought, I can't understand this. No girls ever stuck around to hear me play that long. And so I thought, well, she must like music or something, And so that's finally how we got together. And she knew that I liked music, and she was always for me, And I don't know how she ever put up with me through all this, but wives do that sometimes. A good wife.
Yep.
Because I always say, back of every good man there's a woman, right?
That's right.
I let my recital go.
Yeah.
So all I did was practice on the piano, either bang away on this old piano of my mother's, which was out of tune. I ruined three of them when I was a kid. And one thing I should tell you, I kept a diary for 1 year, and I have in there, I said I played 4 hours today, 4 hours, and even my fingers are tired. So I literally ruined about 3 of them. And so it was a horrible experience. There they were. We had to go to the hospital, and he would pray for her. He was quite a religious person. He was a Christian Scientist, but he would pray. And then I'd come back, and I'd have to spend the rest of the time trying to memorize all the stuff. I didn't bring the program, but Scarlatti, Mozart, Kabalevsky, and Bach. And I let this all go because I knew I'd have 3 weeks off at Christmas, probably. See. And so I worked at that. Well, the end of January, I had to give this recital. And how I memorized that music, I'll never know. Today, I couldn't even play it with the music. But it's one thing I like about jazz. Classical music's okay, and you can memorize something, and if you play it every week at least, it's enough to keep you going.
Right.
It's like my Clair de Lune. When I was first in the service, first 6 months, I'd play Clair de Lune even at the clubs that I played in around Indianapolis and places. But then, all of a sudden, I realized I didn't play it for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I realized I could only get about 3 pages, and then I'm stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Now, today, I can only play about 2 or 3 lines.
Right.
But with with jazz, and if you understand chords, and with ad-libbing and everything, you can create what you want to, and you can play it differently each time.
Yep.
And if you do make a mistake, nobody would catch it anyway. It's just part of the arrangement.
Right.
But with classical music, it's a very difficult thing. I take my hat off to anybody who's a concert pianist, or like at the college, David Kreider.
Mm-hmm.
I think how long and how much they have to practice. Well, at least I learned that doing my piano recital.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what music is, even if you don't, kids, even who take music, even if they don't make it their livelihood or anything, at least they have an appreciation
Sure.
of what it takes to do it.
Yep.
And it's not as easy as it looks.
That's right.
So, anyway, at the end of my college career, I was graduating in February. At the end of January, and
Mm-hmm.
February 1st, I was free. Then I got to thinking, well, all this time I was still painting for $1 an hour, never
Mm-hmm.
got a raise, and making my $4, maybe $20 a week, and
Yeah.
giving my couple of piano lessons.
Right.
And of course, I wouldn't let my wife work because I said, my mother never worked, and I can take care of you too, and you take care of the kids.
Right.
So, but after she did get a job later on, almost better than mine. And at first I said, well, all you're going to do is make our taxes go up. But towards last, I saw where she was going, and I said, boy, just keep on going, because
Mm-hmm.
that saved the day.
Yeah.
And, well, Phil Royer, I was graduating in February, and sometime about the middle of January, he says, Herb, he said, how would you like to try to teach at Westminster High School? I didn't even know where Westminster High School was, Well, I said, well, sure, because I figured not getting a job, maybe ever getting a job, I'd be stuck painting.
Sure.
Because I had said something in Littlestown. The band director said, well, maybe you could help out this guy in junior high school
Mm-hmm.
about something, It didn't sound too good to me.
Yeah.
So I didn't know where I was going at because I didn't even try to get a job in February. I figured there weren't any.
Mm-hmm.
Were not any job. So he said, well, I'll tell you what you do. He says, you dress up. Of course, I was always dressed because Maud Gessner, she hated back in those days, if you didn't wear a tie to her class, you weren't with her,
Mm-hmm.
and she just hated chewing gum. If you chewed gum, any student chewed gum, well, boy. So he said, I'm going to take you to Sam Janis, and he said, if you'd like this job, he said, we'll go over to see him and sign a contract.
Mm-hmm.
So I came down, and we went over, and Sam's sitting at the desk. Well, first of all, they had a teacher, Miller, who was there for about 4 or 5 years, seemed to get along good with the kids. But I don't think he ever did anything like I did.
Mm-hmm.
From what I understand, Joe Chalker said he never even gave spring concerts.
Wow.
The only thing he did was at Christmas, I guess, and
Yeah.
then worked towards us a Stedford.
Yeah.
I Stedford,
Mm-hmm.
which I was in all of them, naturally. I was on that school. So I went over to Sam, and Sam, and then they fired he was an opera singer, but he couldn't play the piano.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't play the piano, you better not be a choral director,
Right.
because you're not just going to make it on singing.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be able to work
Sure.
with the fingers and
Yep.
get what you want out of
Yep.
it. Because I'm not a singer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can sing,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't have a very big range.
Right.
But I have a lot of feeling, and I know what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've heard, you don't have to be a great singer to be a choral director. Most of them aren't. A lot of them have terrible voices.
Mm-hmm.
The best singers sometimes are not the best choral directors,
Right.
because they sing and then people are trying to imitate them.
Sure.
So, anyway, then they got another, Mrs. McIntosh, I believe her name was, from New Hampstead.
Mm-hmm.
She might still be living. And she came in and took over from Thanksgiving. She said, well, she'll go through the Christmas program, and then I think that's the only year, that was the first year they did sing the Hallelujah chorus, because the other fellow could they threw books. I was over the other side at this time.
Yeah.
And they were throwing books and everything else the way I was hearing all over. It must have been a mess.
Yeah.
And so she said she didn't want to stay any longer until February.
Mm-hmm.
So I went over there, and of course Sam says, so you want this choral directing job at Westminster High School? I said, yep. He said, well, he says the kids are pretty hard on choral directors over there. He says some of them only stay a year or two, and I guess the guy who was there 5 years was unusual.
Yeah.
And of course this year they had two. I made the third one.
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, if you want the job, he said, you can have it. Sign here.
Wow.
That won't have much either today. So I started out, and of course Clinton Earhart was the principal then, and his wife was also trying to get a degree too at that time,
Mm-hmm.
up at Western Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
But Clinton was a very intelligent person,
Mm-hmm.
very capable, and he later went to the state education department.
Right.
And well, anyway, I bought the first song called "In the Dawn." I thought, well, this sounds sort of nice and modern, and it can be done a cappella.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this will make a nice slow song, but I couldn't figure out what to do for the second song, because I'd looked back in the music that they were supposed to have had, and I swear the Southern music teacher must have taken it to Philadelphia with him, because I couldn't find anything much.
Huh.
That's why I bought To the Dawn. So
Right.
I told my supervisor, Philip Royer, I said, well, I got one song here to sing, To the Dawn. I said, I bought that. I said, oh, he says, he said, music teachers don't buy their own music for the kids to sing. He says, you build a education.
Right. Right.
So I worried about this, and finally, I forget, Phil Mancha and Moyer. There was a Moyer boy, seniors, and his daddy was the organist and choral director at the Methodist Church. I forget his first name. Well, Moyer went on to be very into music. I wish I knew all he would have accomplished. And of course, Phil Mancha, he had a sister, I forget her name, very talented. But these boys came to me, and they had the song, Almighty God of Our Fathers. I looked at it, and it was in 7 parts, 4 parts boys, and 3 parts, I think it was 8 parts, 4-part girls and 4-part boys.
Right.
first, second tenor,
Mm-hmm.
and all this, first, second soprano.
Yeah.
First. I said, we can't do that. I said, Lord. Oh, yes, we can. Said, we've already done it up at the Methodist Church,
Mm-hmm.
our high school choir.
Yeah.
I thought, how many high school choirs today are in church? Well, here they're telling me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, we'll bring you a piece of that music down. Or no, we'll bring the music down, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
We have it up at church. I think I ordered some, too. I said, okay, well, you know those boys got back of that thing, and they really worked. They were determined.
Mm-hmm.
We were going to sing at the Stedford,
Right.
and the girls worked too, and of course, 1 week before the Stedford, my father-in-law dies,
Mm. Wow.
and he's getting buried in Missouri. So Ellie, my wife, naturally she had to go out, so she flew out to her sister, and I guess they drove down then from Indianapolis. And so a couple days, a day or so, I thought, well, gee, I ought to go to this funeral too.
Mm-hmm.
It's my wife's father.
Yeah.
So I said to Clinton Earhart, I went in, and I don't know what day it was. It might have been a Wednesday. I was going to leave. And I said, you know, my father-in-law died, and I said, I'm going to go out to Missouri, to this funeral, the Ozarks, Elwyn, Missouri, which is a good 1,000 miles or more. And so I decided to go by Indianapolis and then go to Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, he said, Mr. Sell, he says, you can go, but he says, I want you to know this. He says, you're the first music teacher, or the first teacher, I think, that's ever come to Westminster High School directly from a college.
Mm-hmm.
He says, all our teachers are usually start out in some of the other schools, and then they're brought here.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I figured that, and then that's the next step to the Board of Education, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And he said, furthermore, he said, the Westminster High School course is always first at the Stedford.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I'd like it to remain that way. But he said, you can go. I said, well, okay, thank you. So I left, and I got back on Monday morning,
Right.
and the Stedford was that Friday.
Wow.
Well, that was, I got all these kids into the auditorium, you know, got them down there. That was the only morning in any principal ever came in to watch me.
Mm-hmm.
I came in there, and I could see he was sitting back there. He was quite concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got these. They sang this Almighty God of our fathers in 8 parts.
Yeah.
I tell you what a blast that was. And then by 2 to dawn, I had that down, you know.
Yeah.
So we went up. We went up to the Stedford, and of course, Phil Royer. Somebody had just written a book. I forget his name, from New York, and of course he brought him down to critique what's happening.
Right.
So I can remember he called me, and there's well, first of all, Albert DeLong came over, and of course he was the vocal director, you know. And he had come down after the Stedford was over. He says, Herb, he says, that To the Dawn, he says, was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
He he's never heard anything quite like that. Well, boy. I wrote the composer and arranger about this, what was said about his song. And you know what he wrote me back? He says, I'm glad to hear that. He says, I never heard it performed.
Oh, no.
I should have kept that letter, too.
Wow.
But anyway, the fellow from New York says, boy, he says, that was some chorus. He said, you had up there. I said, I've been a choral director since February. But I often thought about those boys, how nice they were to pick that song out, and was determined we'd do that and helped everybody to do that.
Yeah.
Because they weren't throwing books, you know.
Yeah.
And of course our then Joe Chalker had asked me, the band director, he said, why don't we do a concert together next spring? He said, this Mr. Miller, he would never do anything in the spring. I said, okay. So that's when I designed, I was telling you about it. Spring is here.
Right.
I called it, and of course that's the big snowstorm of
snow,
58.
Right. So
I think we were out of school for a week or more.
Yeah. So the concert
27, 28 inches. Oh.
So your concert didn't happen. Your first spring concert didn't take place.
No. And I told her, we talk about it. I said, Joe, I said, what are we going to do about this concert on Saturday night? And he said, well, I don't know what you're going to do, but he says, I can't even get out my front door. And so we did it the next week.
Yeah.
And so I was really very scared because I didn't want to do anything wrong, because I was worried about, if I would get the job. Because actually I was only hired for 4 months, and they could have, if things would have gone, if I'd have Stedford would have been a bum, I'd been the enemy.
Sure.
Plus, I always felt very fortunate. If I wouldn't have gotten in there when I did, I doubt, with my marks at the time, and I had a habit of always playing extra notes. And I forget who it was from Western Maryland, I won't mention any names, but she came in when I was doing my student teaching, and she really marked me up bad. She says, I believe that music should be played as it is written. And so I had, my marks were passable, but they weren't like A's and B's.
Right.
And of course, when I did my vocal recital, they always said, don't look at your professors when you're singing. Well, I looked at my professors, and of course, I was singing in Italian, and of course, I got about 2 pages in, and somewhere along the line, my mind must have gone blank, and I must have skipped about 3 pages, and I can see my Marie Baudet, she was also teaching up there. I could see her flipping all these pages, and I thought I was singing it pretty good, up to that point, but because of that, I got a C. Naturally, she couldn't give me a B or an A. What would they think?
Yes.
And I missed 3 pages of my Italian. So, and I never sing around my wife. I thought, oh, Lord. So I'd always do my singing in the car. I'd sing coming down. What I did, have an accident, but I never did. Of course, that one I told you about, the girl. That was my fault. And so I often think if they looked over somebody else's resume, a report card and everything, they may not have looked at mine. So it was the most fortunate thing to me as a musician to have gotten that job in February. So I got hired back. At that time, music teachers were getting, I think, $2,600 a year. So the next year, I guess I got 28, or 2,800 was the next one. And then I decided I better get a master's degree because I knew there was something about you had to get a master's degree somewhere. In 6 years, you had to start it or something. So I thought, well, I'm not going to. Well, I didn't know where to go. I knew they didn't have a music degree, and that's what I wanted. I didn't just want an education. But I did go up to Western Maryland College. Well, they thought I should take my English over. I thought, oh, Lord God, I don't want to go through that. So I went down to the University of Maryland and took my report cards and everything. And they said, whoops, they said, I got it up here now. They said, well, they said, if you take 3 courses, we'll give you 3 courses to take. And they were all 2 credits. They don't have stuff like that anymore, I don't think, 2 credit courses. Yeah. Well, I had to work as hard for those 2 credit courses as you would for 3.
Sure.
But anyway, if I didn't get any C's, I could go into the master's program.
Wow.
Well, I got all B's.
Good.
So then the next year I could start the master's program. And I was always interested in research. And of course, my wife was an excellent typist. She could talk.
Wow.
She could type faster than people can take shorthand. She was just a whiz. And everything was just right. And she worked out there for a firm. I think it was an insurance firm. I don't think it was law. Downtown Indianapolis. And she only had high school, but she was just a whiz typer. And so I went down there first year, and I did research. I had Rosemary Grantzer was her name. She's quite famous. She was the head of the music department. Her husband was the Spivak, who was the head of the Library of Congress. And later on, that's how I got, to get my correspondence with Ira Gershwin. But anyway, I did research on Bach and things she didn't think I could find. I went to the library and I came back and she'd have written on a paper, very fine, excellent research, and then I did a baby's thesis. Usually you don't get that until the end of your master's degree.
Right.
But it's where I came in at and lined up, and so I got this research course, which they say you're lucky if you get a C. Most get a D. And Lord, I got an A on the baby's thesis. I couldn't believe it. Well, I was in with her, And then Bob Kersey and I went. We had classes together. He was working his doctor's degree, and I was. In fact, one year we roomed.
Wow.
And we went down the street, and I'd pick out the papers out of the waste paper, out of the baskets along the street, He always laughed about it. He says, what are you reading? I said, well, I'm reading stock market. I didn't have any stocks, but and he always laughed about that. In fact, that's when I got in my first stomach troubles. I never had any trouble, but by, I was going on 30. I was 27 finally when I started teaching. And so I was 30 when I was down there. And I would go down with a $10 bill. And that's what I would live on for the whole week.
Wow.
And, of course, most of the time, I lived on hamburgers, and I get coffee, and I don't know what, or a donut in the morning or something. And I didn't do much more in the evening, get a hamburger and coffee or something. And I think it was all the grease that was building up my tummy.
Yeah.
And it was first of my stomach problems.
Yeah.
But that's all I take would be $10 because there wasn't any more to take. And then when I come back, I give a couple piano lessons about 3:30, 4 o'clock,
Yeah.
5 before I get home along the street.
Wow.
But anyway, I made out pretty good down there because one of the things I did, I would stay down in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
I'd leave Monday morning, I'd come back Fridays,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't have any money, so I couldn't go uptown or messing
Mm-hmm.
around. So
Sure.
I would study, and I learned how to. I don't know. I guess other people have done it too, going to school. But I finally learned how to study. I would read my book, and I'd underline. Well, till I got done, I'd have 3/4 of it underlined, the
Sure.
chapter,
Yeah.
and then I would write everything handwritten
Mm-hmm.
on a tablet.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would read what I wrote that I thought was important.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd get up the next morning and I'd read again what I had written,
Yeah.
and I'd take a test.
Sure.
And boy, oh boy, all the history and the stuff,
Mm-hmm.
everything was right there.
Yep.
And I'd make A's.
Yeah.
Finally, I'm making A's.
Yeah.
And I
Wow.
really did very good at the university. Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. And I think I'm so glad that I had music. There are not too many of those, but I had a music, what you call masters in music education,
Mm-hmm.
not just education. It was
Right.
all music,
Right.
and I learned so much, and that's what made me try to be a better teacher. And
Mhm.
so that's why when I first started out, I was definitely afraid to do anything popular too much, and I was doing madrigals and
Mhm.
Bach and
Sure.
trying to not only impress people but make myself feel good. I think,
Mhm.
well, that music teacher said I had a one-track mind. I'm sort of, I wish she was around right
Yeah.
now, what I'm
Right.
teaching,
Right.
But then, and also, Phil Royer was, I respected him. Some people, I guess some younger teachers were beginning to feel as though he was a little old-fashioned. One thing he did was, at the Eisteddfods, he always concluded with a 15-minute version of some opera.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to do this real good, after Christmas, I'd always take Friday, and that would be my opera day.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't do anything during the first 4 days.
Right.
And if we had Carmen, Mikado, Faust,
Mm.
I forget, he had about 5 or 6 different operas. And then he would usually start again
Mm-hmm.
because the kids wouldn't remember,
Yeah.
But I often thought that they were difficult because they lasted 15 minutes, and
Mhm.
if your kids were going to sing it, you had to teach it to them.
Sure.
And you had to teach it all to them because
Mhm.
in Stedford you only picked out, when I started Western Maryland or Westminster High School, I had about 120 seniors, at least 80 juniors,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe 60 sophomores.
Wow. Yeah.
So the classroom was full. Some of my
Mhm.
classes would have 70 kids in
Mhm.
it, and that's a lot of kids. I always
Yeah.
put the boys up close to the piano because I didn't
Mhm.
trust them as much as the girls. And they'd have fun with me, They sometimes I'd be standing there. I always stood up to play the piano,
Mhm.
so sometimes I feel this piano coming back. And the blackboard was right back of me. And after a while, I
Mhm.
realized, holy smokes, not much room for me in the the blackboard.
Mhm.
And then I realized they were pushing this piano just so
Very
slow.
slowly.
And then I'd take that piano and I'd ram it right back on their feet. Oh, and then they'd laugh. They would laugh, They like to pull jokes on me. But, I think about all the money that is spent. I probably shouldn't talk about
Yeah.
this, but I think of all the money. My best times were at the old school on Longwell Avenue with I had a pretty big room. It was a little bit bigger than some of the rooms, which you could actually, if you really packed the thing, you could get 100 kids in there, but they were up against the walls.
Sure.
And I often think, as far as my career, I did my best things in that little room with a piano and a little old record player.
Yeah.
And I taught a lot about the history of music. I would spend one day a week, a Renaissance. I would start way back at the beginning of time and work up and get to the I spent a lot of time Renaissance and through. Up to, now I get to Beethoven and Bach, finally.
Yeah.
And I did have some kids come and say that when they went to college, they said, their music professor said, well, where in the world did you ever learn anything about all this kind of stuff? You know, Palestrina and all these people, you know. And but I would teach that because that's what they taught me at the University of Maryland, and I thought it was really important.
Yeah. So they were well prepared
when
they got to college. Yeah.
But anyway, I forgot where we were. I was on the Eisteddfod at the operas, and I often thought, what a wonderful. They didn't realize it, and I didn't realize it when I first started, but that was a learning experience for me because when was I going to see Faust?
Right.
You know, or hear all this music and all the songs of Carmen and all these things that we did. And I thought, that is something really that kids, I'm not sure, they don't do things like that.
They don't. Yeah.
And that's why, to me, I think Carroll County, Phil did so much to make the county really a vocal, and it still is a good county for vocal music.
Yep, it really is.
And,
so how long did you teach at Westminster High School?
Well, I taught, I guess, 35 years. Yeah. See, I got late start because I was paper hanger for 2 years,
right.
And service for 3. And,
sure.
And
then you started doing some very interesting things with the programs. You started having themed programs for your concerts, and you started inviting, I'm going to call them ringers, but you started inviting some world-class musicians into the schools to work with the students and to give concerts for the public.
Well, when I first started teaching, I was saying I was a little nervous, a little scared, because when I went to Western Maryland, it was it's not like it is now. You know, jazz was not the thing. And so, and of course, Phil, you have to respect him as a teacher, and Phil was quite a violinist, and so I did respect him. I remember, I'll tell this story, I remember when I was about a junior there, I guess, and I said to him one day, I thought I was going to be a band director. I thought that's what I was going to study. You know, come out of there, I could be the band director, but I don't know. You know, when I was in high school, I probably was not the best singer for my director either. My voice was changing. I used to go up and down, you know, when I was a freshman. You make everybody laugh and this and that. I wish now I would have taken more interest in singing, because when I played the piano, I could, you know, give these nice words are so beautiful, you know, to the music that has been written in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even today, some good songs. But I was only interested in playing the piano and imitating Count Basie and George Shearing. When I went to college, you played George Shearing, the girls would sit sit on your piano seat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they wouldn't do that today. But I mean, that was the big thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm getting off the track. But anyway, well, the celebrities, when I was only 16, just learned how to drive. I remember driving to Frederick, and because I was on the Frederick radio station, they sent me a form to meet Count Basie
Mm-hmm.
when he was down there. So I did, and I went down, had a ticket to get in, and I remember saying to Count Basie, this was about 46,
Yeah.
I said, how long do you think Boogie Woogie's going to last? Well, he looked at me and he said, well, he says, I'll tell you. He says, I think one Boogie Woogie song will be good any night. And he was about right,
Yeah.
because if you play Boogie Woogie for 2 hours,
Yeah.
you are going to put somebody to sleep or walk out on you.
Yes.
It's like they said with Bach, in his fugues,
Mm-hmm.
I said 4 voices. By the time he gets his 4th voice in, his audience was leaving. But anyway, I was always interested in Stan Kenton
Mm-hmm.
and these bands when I was 17, 18. And, of course, when I first got in service, I was in my glory because I met a lot of musicians, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and in the 50s, you knew all the standards.
Mm-hmm.
You had to know them all.
Sure.
They pick this, pick
Yeah,
this, pick
yeah.
this,
Yeah.
Perdido was a
Yeah,
big thing,
sure.
and How High the Moon, boy,
Mhm.
and you had to know, because they could play them.
Right.
Of course, by 53, rock and roll started rolling in, and
Mhm.
things changed there for a while.
Yeah.
But jazz is still a good thing.
Mhm.
It just has a smaller audience.
Mhm.
But now getting back to, you asked me about the celebrities and things.
Right.
Well, when I first started teaching, I was a little nervous because I didn't want to do anything to upset my supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a good boy and would not do anything jazzy.
Yeah.
In fact, the first concert, there was a song, and I said, I forget what the name was, and I said, written by Gluck. Well, after the concert, he says, Herb, he says, it's not Gluck. He said, it's Gluck. He says, you have a program. He said, you don't have to announce everything.
Yeah.
So I was very careful, and then finally, in 63, I knew the Civil War thing of Gettysburg
Right.
was on, and I decided I would do a lot to do with the Civil War,
Right.
and that is still one of the most beautiful recordings we ever made.
Mm-hmm.
I forget who did the narration, but it's clear as a bell.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through all these Civil War things.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the South was over here and the
Mhm.
North was on this side of the river,
Mhm.
and they're singing back and forth. And then also West Side Story was popular that year, so I decided to do West Side Story, and
Mhm.
I remember a young man, he's still living, I get him to sing, Pat Rucker, who had a beautiful tenor voice. And when I first started teaching, somebody said, oh, you wait till Pat Rucker gets over here from junior high school.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he came over, and to me, it was the most wonderful tenor voice I ever heard. I couldn't believe that a young boy had such a smooth voice. Well, he sang Maria
Yeah.
like I never heard, and he can still do it.
Wow.
In fact, I said the next time, if we're all around, I said next year, I said I'm going to have you do that in my church,
Mm-hmm.
because you could do it so wonderful. Well, that concert went over so well that I'm thinking of our principal at that time. Just skipped my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the principal of the 60s?
No.
Oh, isn't that awful?
It'll come to you.
Gee. Well, anyway, he said, and I always liked him, and his wife was a music teacher. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Clinton Earhart left that year. He was gone, mm-hmm. and new principal came in, and he said, don't you worry, Herb. He said, my wife's a music teacher, and he says, I know exactly what you go through as mm-hmm. music teachers. Mm-hmm. He says, I'll take care of you. I thought, well, Clinton had me almost scared, you know. Yeah. And so after that concert, he said, next year, he says, I think you ought to do your own concert instead of having it with the orchestra mm-hmm. and stuff. So the next year I did a thing called Bells of Santa Ynez, which was written by Paul Weston. It was from a thing from California. And the bells rang and rang and rang, mm-hmm. and I think Mr. Spangler at the college, who played the Rhapsody in Blue for me the first time, his daughter was in school, and she rang that bell. But she only had there was a little slit in the church we had on the stage. Yeah. And she rang those bells and rang that bells in time, and I never could figure out how she could see from that little opening. Wow. And be with me all that time. Well, she was a very, extra student, Yeah. And, so then in 1965, once again, I got back to the Civil War because that was the end, and I called mm-hmm. it the Lonesome Train because that's when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Mm-hmm. The Lonesome Train was recorded, and it was quite lengthy, and you had to use a lot of your imagination, and of course it required a group of boys playing guitar or banjos mm-hmm. or mm-hmm. anything, and of course Herb Ruby was at that time in school, who has become, a pastor. Mm-hmm. I like Herb. And Shelley Armacost, oh boy, what a voice. Well, Herb was on stage with these musicians, mm-hmm. and he was playing guitar then too, and they could mm-hmm. sing, mm-hmm. and they do the crazy stuff, that folk singers supposed to do. Right. But the Lonesome Train, of course, is Lincoln leaving Washington, D.C., and going through all these different cities. Mm-hmm. I think I forget how long it took to get out there. I don't know if it was at least a week.
Oh, it was a week at least, yeah.
And I still remember then, Springfield, Illinois, mm-hmm. and then you're finally there. Mm-hmm. But it was a whole history of Lincoln. Mm-hmm. Well, I needed a train sound, so I'll never forget. I went up to Stu's, and he said, we can bring an organ down here. There was a girl who could play the organ, and so she had a way of playing the puzzle. Vroom, vroom, and this train, and get it going faster, Yeah. And that's the way it would start, And a lot of kids had parts in that, and but it's the one recording that I don't have, and I lost it somewhere, but it was one I wished that I still had. Mm-hmm. Pete Seeger he's still living in there, I believe, and he was just a young person when that came out, and he was one of the big boys in that. Sure. Well, it cost a little money, those books. At that time, it was $2.50, and boy, oh boy, you thought that was a fortune. Yep. Because when I first started teaching, music was 20 cents. Mm-hmm. Copy, 15, 25 cents, and then I remember when it went to 30 cents, mm-hmm. I thought, oh my Lord, 30 cents a copy for music? What are we going to, how can we afford that? Oh, and long, 35, 40. Now today, it's more like $2.80, $2.90, $2.25 just for a copy of music. Yeah. Well, that really turned out to be one of my favorites. Remember Dr. Dalrymple?
Mm-hmm.
His daughter, I forget her first name, played the drums through that. She was a very good drummer. And she also did, we did one of the best versions of the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Mm-hmm.
And of course she was playing the drums through that, and of course they had the fife or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Well, then the next year, out came, for the first time, 3 or 4 compositions with bass and drums, and they were specially written, and there were a couple of Gershwin songs. I think one was Foggy Day in London Town, and I forget. I thought, boy, oh boy, these really look cool. I never saw anything like this written for a chorus.
Yeah.
So I got those, and I experimented a little bit, and I brought my bass player up from York.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, he came, oh my gosh, to, I finally retired. He'd
Yeah.
come every year and
Wow.
play the bass
Yeah.
with the kids, you
Mm-hmm.
know. They gave a little rhythm.
Yeah.
And so we did that. I think I had the program all we did. But anyway, the next year, that was 66, I can remember everything those early years.
Yeah.
Just like it was yesterday, even the
Sure.
guys and the girls.
Yeah.
And then I got lost in the new school. But anyway, when I was about 17, I had met a girl around Stilton, Pennsylvania, around Harrisburg, and of course I went to a friend of mine's birthday in Harrisburg. They had some relatives there, and this gal came, sit down at the piano. A lot of girls sit down at my piano,
Yeah.
you know. And she was pretty. Oh boy. So I said, well, I knew it was a long way to Stilton from Littlestown, but I said, well, I said, would you like to go out? Sure. So I don't know how many times I went over Stilton. It was, I think it was around 1947.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went over there. Oh boy, there goes my voice.
Over on the side.
Yeah. I'm going to have a drink.
That's fine.
Okay. Or maybe I need a fisherman's friend.
Well, you're welcome to it.
That's okay. But anyway, I went over there one night, and she says, we're going to see Paul Whiteman. She says, I have tickets for us at the Forum.
Wow.
That's a pretty fancy place, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, wow. And he was doing an all Gershwin program.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I got to see Earl Wild, the famous pianist, when he was young. He was handsome then, and he was still handsome at 90 years old.
Wow.
I haven't heard he died, but he'd be 95 now.
Yeah.
He played Carnegie Hall when he was 90. Wow. Just fabulous pianist. Well, I tell you, that and Paul Whiteman had his still original banjo player from way back in the 20s, you know.
Mm-hmm.
He was the only guy that was original anymore, but I'll never forget that when they took off on Rhapsody in Blue. That's what I decided I had to play Rhapsody in Blue. It lasted so long.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, I thought, well, wouldn't that be nice if I could have had songs like that to sing in high school, you know. All we had was, you know, either religious songs or some other song about the country.
Right.
I'm talking about the pastures.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So the program was a big program at that time. They don't give programs out like that much anymore around or smaller.
Yeah.
But I kept that. I still have it at home. And So in 47, I got to, or in 67, I got to thinking, I thought, well, now I saw that Gershwin program and when Gershwin had died just 10 years before. Now this is his 30th anniversary. Right. And I got to thinking, and so I got all the books in Gershwin, and I would sit down at wee hours in the morning trying to figure these things out, and then how to get this music together. Well, with Menchie in Hanover, he had a lot of old things in at that time.
Right.
And I could get certain things. Like in Gershwin, most places you would have just got a booklet with 4 or 5 songs at the most, which the college probably used up there, Mr. DeLong. But I got the idea, listening to Porgy and Bess, I was able to get all these old octavos, 20 and 25 cents a piece, of the various songs in Porgy and Bess.
Right.
And so it turned out to be almost 30, 35 minutes long.
Wow.
Continuous. I arranged it, and the boy who played it was Mike Billingsley.
Yeah.
You know Mike?
Yeah.
Well, Mike, when I listen to that recording, I think, how in the world to get that 17-year-old boy probably was, managed to play this Porgy and Bess the way I wanted it, and to keep it going and to modulate, and we worked these things out together, he and I. Then he also played the swing stuff, which he was pretty good at. Yeah. Mike was one of the best boy pianists that I ever had. So, reading the story, then I realized that George did so many things from Swanee on up, so I could start with Swanee and get up to I saved Porgy and Bess for the end, for the finale, but then I realized he went to Hollywood and wrote all these beautiful songs out in Hollywood, so I put those together. So I had a three-way, and then I thought, well now, and then I got a whole Rhapsody in Blue, which is 8 parts, which takes, you have to ooh, ah, da, 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 and had not words, but you got to blend along with the, and it starts with the theme, and then it goes on until you get to the end. Wow. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be something? So, well, it takes a lot of patience. So that a lot of high school kids try to learn Rhapsody in Blue, oohing and awing and da, da, da. I'm not sure I don't think it would be done today. But I was determined this way it was going to be. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have Dr. Spangler come down from the college and play the piano parts, and we'll sing to it, And then I thought, well, now Dr. Hagermeyer, my piano teacher, I used to work in the junk and everything, and when I come and take my lessons, my fingers were oily and black. I often thought, it's a wonder she doesn't say, don't you ever wash your hands? Well, I couldn't get them clean. Yeah. So I thought, well, I'll ask her if she might just try Concerto in F. She told me, well, I had her do it with the Choral Society. One time I was doing an all Gershwin program. She came down, forget where she's living now. I don't know if it's Ohio or Michigan, might be Michigan. But she told me when she came down, she wanted to play the 3 preludes. She said, I don't want to play that concerto in F anymore. And I said, unfortunately, I have a student. I can't think of her name from Westminster here. I think she's still in the banks or something. I'm not sure. She could play those 3 preludes like as good as any college professor.
Right.
I said, I need Concerto in F. She says, okay. So she came down and she played it once more. And money. We didn't have much money here and there.
Yeah.
And I don't think I gave her, I don't know if we gave her $200. And I asked her, I said, I guess it took quite a while to get that together. Yes, she says, I played that for the last 30 days.
Wow.
And I don't think she'd ever do it again. And she she must have really worked hard on it when she did for the high school choir. And I'm sure she was very impressed with the Gershwin concert that day, because I don't think they could have done it any differently up there at their college.
Sure.
But anyway, she said it was one of the most difficult things to play because she she had to be the pianist and the orchestra at the same time.
Right.
And she,
That's right.
gosh, sorry. But if she would have just played the piano parts, it wouldn't have made too much sense.
Right.
So she had to incorporate the orchestra parts and still play her parts to get through this movement. So she, I remember when I was going to school up there and she was working on her doctorate degree, her doctorate was, to finish it, was playing Bartok's concerto.
Wow.
And that must be mean. I've never heard it, but everything he did was... So, anyway, so that turned out to be okay.
Yeah.
Then Ken Messeri, I don't know, he could have been a little controversial. He and his wife still, we send Christmas cards together. And but he liked me. And so he would charge me up, And of course he wrote wonderful articles in the newspaper for me for our course. And that never happened after him.
Wow.
I never had anybody quite that was interested in to do things. Of course, Mike Eaton always told me, he says, well, if you're going to put anything in the paper, you better write it yourself, because everybody else gets it fouled up. Anyway, he said, now what are you going to do next year to top that? Well, that inspired me, I thought, well, then I read, Irving Berlin was going to be 80 years old. I thought, well, holy smokes, that's the time to do it. So, again, I would always get a book, and I would read, and I would write, and of course Mike Eaton would, I always had narration to go along, because I believed when I did something, I wanted to do exactly the way it happened. And Mike would, he said, you can't read all this stuff, and he'd go through and he'd take care of my writings. So I did the same thing with Irving Berlin. I put all his early ragtime stuff together and Broadway, and then I did Annie Get Your Gun, which was his most famous show, and ended up with all his patriotic things, which he did so much for World War II.
Absolutely.
So that turned out to be 47 songs, and lasted about 2.5 hours. And of course, somebody wrote me a letter, and she said, she said, we were just up in New York and saw a show similar to that, and she says, yours was better.
No kidding.
Well, I was just sort of ahead of the time. So then what we're going to do next. So I've been trying. In 1969, I realized Duke Ellington was going to be 70 years old. I thought, holy smokes, he's that old? Because I was just 40. And I thought, well, now's the time to do that. And then right away I got the idea. I thought, now, I wonder if I could book his band. Because in 67, I corresponded with Ira Gershwin
Mm-hmm.
because of my head of the department at the University of Maryland in music, and her husband was Spivak. Did I talk about that before on here?
No.
And I said, wouldn't it be wonderful, I'm playing all Gershwin concerts, I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could get a letter from Ira Gershwin to read to the public? Well, she says, you got to be mighty careful. But she says, I think we could work it out. She says, you know, he stayed at my house last summer on his 70th birthday, or this past summer. And he said, and if he comes to be with you, he says, you better have plenty of cigars and scotch. Because she says that's all he did, was to smoke cigars and drink scotch.
Wow.
But she says, I think we can word it just correct that you'll. So she told me what to say, and I did it, and I thought, well, probably nothing's going to happen. And the day before the Gershwin concert, or that morning, through the mail, by airmail, came this beautiful letter from Ira Gershwin, saying that he couldn't believe that high school students were going to do all this music. So that got me a little inspired. And then, where are we now? We're at 60 or 69.
Right.
I got through 68. That was. I couldn't. I tried like everything to make contact with Irving Berlin, because I knew the way it was designed, he would have approved of it, but never. And I don't think anybody could hear from him. He didn't even talk to his closest friends, you know, at the end. And so, 69 with Duke Ellington, I called New York right away. And they said yes. I said, I'd like to have him on a Monday night, because I always book my things on Monday nights. One reason for doing things on Monday nights, because I was always playing somewhere in the weekend.
Yeah.
I said, yes. I said, well, how much? They said, $2,500. I said, well, gee, because I knew most of the bands were getting about $1,750, you know. And, well, they said Duke Ellington he won't come down there for less than $2,500. And I said, okay. I said, is he going to have all his guys with him? Yep. He never goes anywhere unless he takes that band. He says, some of those guys have been playing for 25 years. He said, he'll be there.
Right.
So, okay. So I started making up seating charts. And I told the kids, I said, now. And then I later on, well, I said to the agent, I forget, you would know the name, and I said, do you think he might direct my kids in one of his songs, Solitude and Intermission? Well, said he might. He does funny things. So anyway, I made up the seating chart, and of course I gave the teachers, or the administration, not all the teachers, but the administration, free tickets. And I gave some free tickets over to the Board of Education.
Right.
Those who were in music, or I knew, had them sit down in front. And so, and I told the kids, I said, you guys saw these tickets. I sold 150 of them myself, or we'd have been in a hole. I was selling them in Gettysburg, every place I went, playing. They couldn't believe I was after Duke Ellington with the kids. Even my daughter, she says, I told my friends at Littlestown High School, you're having Duke Ellington. And they said, who's that? Of course, some of the teachers knew, and they did come down.
Yeah.
Music teachers. And so I said, now, I said, any of you who buy tickets, I said, I think we'll make a course, and I said, you will be singing with Duke Ellington. Wow. Well, there was about 50 or 60
Mm-hmm.
bought tickets.
Mm-hmm.
The rest didn't. They probably didn't come, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so about that day before he came, I got this, or the day before, I got this call from Mercer Ellington from New York.
Mm-hmm.
And he went and talked to Herb Settle. So I talked to him, and he said, now, what do you want my dad to do? I said, well, I said, I have this real great arrangement of Solitude. And I said, they really know how to do it. And I said, I thought it would be nice if he would direct them at intermission.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he says, I think he'll do that. He says he does things sort of off the cuff, you know. I thought, oh boy, it's going to work.
Yeah.
So they came, and of course, it's my first venture,
Mm-hmm.
and they were supposed to be there at, I think, 7:30. Or maybe it was 8 o'clock,
Yeah.
I guess. And of course, 7:30 came, and there's still no bus. Mr. Ken Masseri, he's running around like, he said, well, he says, I saw them in Atlantic City. He said, in the summer, he says, my gosh, he said, they look terrible. I thought, oh, God. So about 25 of,
Yeah.
there's a bus coming, Ken
Yeah.
said, there's
Yeah.
a bus coming around.
Yeah.
So, down comes the bus.
Yeah.
Out comes all these famous
Yeah.
musicians, Paul Gonsalves,
Yeah.
all of them, Johnny Hodge. I mean, they get out, there's no Duke. I thought, holy smokes. Well, I didn't realize how he traveled. I thought, well, when Count Basie plays, he's always on the bus.
Yeah.
So, in they walk. Well, it smelled like Booze Alley.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Gonsalves was always known to drink himself. He did drink himself to death, but
Mm-hmm.
he was something. But they were all pretty well boozed up.
Yeah.
I was the only band that
Yeah.
that ever smelled like that. And all of a sudden, I thought, well, where's Duke Ellington? Here he pulls up. He comes up in a car, and of course, Harry Carney's his baritone saxophone player was with him for
Mhm.
25 years or more, one of the oldest. I didn't realize it, but if it was drivable, he would go with Harry Carney, and Harry Carney would drive him without him being on a bus.
Mm-hmm.
If it was any distance at all, then he
Yeah.
would fly.
Right.
So they were going to Pittsburgh the next night, and so he flew up there, I
Yeah.
think. But he went to Baltimore and
Mm-hmm.
flew up. But anyway, he came in, and I was thinking of Ken Masseri, saying how bad they looked. Well,
Yeah.
he came in, and I looked at him. I mean, he was sort of all drooped over.
Mhm.
He only looked like he was about 5'4" or 5 foot like me, 5'5" now. And I thought, holy smokes. Well, he wanted to know where his dressing room was. I thought, dressing room? Count Basie never asked for a dressing room. He just went back with the guys.
Yeah.
And, well, Kent says, I'll fix him up.
Yeah.
So he got a room right aside of his office.
Right.
There. So he went up there. And the last words I heard of him was, he says to his valet, he said, did you see my clothing?
Oh.
Well, he said, no. He said, it must be on the bus. I thought, oh, Lord God, don't tell me he came down here, he doesn't have any clothes to wear. So I went back quick and forget the young man he'd set up the bandstand and stuff. And of course, Mercer right away, he took off the lid on the piano. He knew how to do that.
Yeah.
You didn't want that lid on the grand.
Right.
And so it was 8 o'clock, and or 5 of 8, and no Duke. All I could think of was did he have his clothing? So then this young man says to me about 2 minutes of 8, he says, now, he says, you go out there on the stage, he says, you introduce the Duke and say anything you want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you want me to go out there? I looked around, and half these guys, half of them weren't even on the stand,
Yeah,
you know, because
yeah,
we didn't have a
yeah.
curtain. You can't
Right.
pull the curtain there,
Right.
you know. So I'm just about ready to go around the corner. I thought, well, here goes.
Yeah.
And then he says, well, he said, now just wait a minute. He said, this fellow doesn't have his tenor sax, or he
Mhm.
doesn't have his sax yet out of his case.
Yeah.
I thought, oh God, thank heaven. Because so I waited a little teeny bit, you know, and everything. He said, okay, now you can go. I go out there, and these guys were sitting there, you know, messing around, you know.
Yeah.
And I gave my speech about Duke being one of the great American composers.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and I said, and now here's the Duke. And boom, off they went with the A train. I couldn't believe it. I looked back there, I thought, how in the world did they ever get their instruments? But they've been through that
Yeah,
mill so much,
many
and
times.
that's the way they were.
Yeah.
If you read a Duke Ellington books, you'll
Yeah.
find out it was like a bunch of school children you had to sort of take care of,
Yeah.
you know. So I went out, and they playing through this thing about 2-3 times, and I thought, holy smokes, about time for this thing to end, you know. And I went down and stood beside my wife, and I thought, I said, Lord God, I said, last time I saw Duke Ellington, he wasn't even dressed. And no Duke, and I knew they were coming to the end of this course.
Mm-hmm.
And Lord God, out came Duke. He was dressed all in white,
Yeah.
and he came out and sit in that stool, ripped around there, and he had about 4 measures to go.
Yeah.
That was it, and up he got.
Yeah.
What a showman.
Wow.
So, and then one more story. When I went back at intermission, he wanted to know what he was supposed to do
Yeah.
with these kids.
Right.
So I had the music there. I said,
Mhm.
well, I said, all you got to do is, and Mike Billingsley's sister was the pianist.
Right.
I said, all you got to do, I said, sweet little girl over there. I said, you just give her a signal when you come down. I said, you go, doop, 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 doop,
Mm-hmm.
in my.
Mm-hmm.
I said, that's all you got to do. Well, intermission came. So I went back to see him, and God, there he's sitting. He was reading astrology, and had a turban around his head,
no.
and he was only in his shorts,
Yeah.
you know. And that's when he asked me, you know, what he had to do.
Yeah.
So I went out, and then he came out. He was all dressed in a new outfit, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what he did. The kids all came down there. I said, we're going out there. And then he came down the steps. He went out there. He pointed there. And his little legs,
Yeah.
they go back and forth with the rhythm, you know. Some of the band tried to come in, but I think he was in his glory, you know.
Wow. Yeah.
Seeing those smiling kids up there.
Sure.
So that was Duke. I guess, boy, what time have we got?
Take your time.
Anyway, in 1970, since I couldn't get Chester Hairston, when Duke was going to be there, I wanted him to come in. I thought, with my concert, because my concert was all based on spirituals and jazz and
Right.
stuff, and I thought it'd be nice to have Chester there
Mhm.
and do his own works and things. And then I did Duke Ellington, you know, concert on him, about 10 songs. So, anyway, like they told me, you can't get him unless you book a year ahead. So,
Right.
so I did write him a letter, and he wrote a letter back. I remember, I think, I don't know if I said it on there, but Dr. Sell.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, he must have me mixed up, you know. He said, I'll be glad to come next year
Mm-hmm.
at that date. He said, I've been all over the world, but I've never been in Maryland before.
Wow. Yeah.
So I thought, well, boy.